So today in this project, we're going to take a look at technology in worship. And so one of the major reasons why I chose technology in worship is because the staff that I serve on in the church that I serve at, I do most of the technology things that are going to aid in our worship. And so I run computers, soundboards, all the amplifications, monitors, things like that. I'm put in control of, and I operate on a weekly basis. And so I also plan how to use those things in our worship service and then also use them in the worship service. And so what we see is that churches are evolving. Every single year, we come up with different ways to use technology in our church. And one of those ways is through worship. And so we span such a broad spectrum of how we use technology in our worship. And you can consider the things that you use in your church, in your worship service. You think about microphones, amplifiers, soundboards, equalizers, computers, projectors, monitors, just etc. All the things that you use that you hope to aid your worship service in. Because the very thing that we want to do as a church is point people into the direction of Christ. And so from the very moment that they walk into the doors of the church, we want their focus to be on Christ. In any way that we can help aid in that, we can help move them into that position or heighten that moment of worship for them. That's what we as the church want to do for them. And so the use of technology can really, really help us in this area. And so what we want to do is take a few instances where we see technology as beneficial, and we're going to use amplification and projection as the two things that we focus on and how we can better use that to serve our churches. Technology not only shapes our worship today, but look at the lack of technology just a few hundred years ago and how it even shaped worship by not having technology. You see the two things that worship without technology, we look at amplification and projection, just the two things. Consider how churches and cathedrals were built. Just say the 15 and 1600s when there were no microphones. Churches were built more narrow so that their voices could be amplified and projected to a further place, maybe in the back of the church. A requirement for preachers was that they had the ability to speak loudly so that people could hear them in the back. Just think of Charles Spurgeon. He preached from an elevated platform in his church so that he could be heard from a far distance away. And so people really were hurting in amplification just hundreds of years ago. Think about projection that we use today and how they didn't have the ability to project things. One of the researchers in this project presented that think of how disconnected somebody must have felt the first time that they walked into a church during worship. They would have not known the songs, they would have not known the words, they would have not known the prayers maybe that they were saying. And so they didn't have any way to participate in worship. They were just passive there while everybody else was going on. So we want to look at the benefits of worship with technology today. And we look at the benefits of amplification and the benefit of projection. And so first we want to look at amplification. And amplification is something that we really don't even think about much because we're so used to it. But without it, we would probably be in turmoil or be lost in some of our worship services. And so amplification technology has really been possibly the best benefit we've had to our worship services. And so where hundreds of years ago somebody with a soft voice would have had a hard time leading worship or a hard time leading a teaching or a sermon because they couldn't be heard. But today with amplification, we use microphones and speakers. We can control that volume and raise it and lower it when we need to. That way it's a comfortable atmosphere for everyone. And so amplification has been a huge blessing in that. It's also been beneficial to those who are hard of hearing and for those who are far away. I know in our church, We have special devices that people with low hearing or who struggle and have a hard of hearing, we give to them, and it heightens the amplification. It almost amplifies the amplification in a sense. And so that just technology has been a part where somebody who was hard of hearing felt like they were not part of the service now feels engaged because they can hear things. They can hear the preacher. They can hear the singing going on. And so not only does amplification help with people speaking and helping us hear that, but it also helps in our worship service if we think about it, and in our music. Amplification not only benefited our music, but amplification changed our worship music in a sense. Think about the style that church music has today, where once we were traditional, more traditional. Now you see the times are turning where a lot of churches are moving to what's known as the praise band or the worship team. And so amplification has given us a way to blend those instruments together and heighten and lower certain instruments and even certain voices to provide a worship through music in a better way. And so amplification has really just changed the direction of our worship music. And so at one time when it might have been the organ is drowning out the singer or the worship leader, now we can use microphones to project that. Or when one instrument's like the drums drown out a guitar, well, now amplification, we can raise the guitar level until where it evens out and balances out. And we can also do that with all the instruments and voices put together. One thing that you probably have heard in your church, especially if it's a worship team or a praise band, is you look at what mixers have done and created loops and what we know as a padding. And so maybe you've heard something like this behind either a prayer or a song or a transition. Technology has made this a distinct sound to where it provides an atmosphere of worship that we've come to know and to feel comfortable with. And so maybe you've heard this before. So projection technology has also been beneficial, just like amplification, and it served our worship services really well. If you are over the age of 20, you probably remember the overhead projector. And oh my goodness, did this just revolutionize worship in the churches. I can remember as a young boy, I thought it was so cool that they let me change the transparency sheet on the overhead projector. And now I look back with the projectors that we use today with the data projectors, I thought, my goodness, if you brought an overhead projector in, people would think we are in the Stone Ages. But projection has really been beneficial to our church in a lot of ways. Think about those people that a few hundred years ago came to a worship service for the first time and really couldn't participate well because they didn't know the words. Well, now projection has given us a way to present new songs. They've given us a way to present graphics, videos, words, all kinds of things that can be shown on screens that have really been beneficial to our worship. And so graphics are really to projection kind of what padding is to music. And so the graphics kind of can help create and promote an atmosphere of worship. Just look at the background in this video. You see how it's changing and shifting, even the particles and the color of the particles. We see this often and it creates an atmosphere. And so data projectors enable us to do this and kind of help create that. And it benefits our worship and it draws people's attention into worship. And so amplification and digital projection are really only two of many technological advances that benefit our worship service today. And so what we want to do now is look at why and how are we using those things to benefit our worship service. And so the question is no longer, are churches using technology? Are they embracing technology? The real question is, how is the church affected by technology, and especially the worship service using technology. And so we want to look at a few reasons of why our churches are using technology, and just to present a couple precautions to the church that we need to think about before just grabbing up the newest technology and using it. And so the first precaution that we see is the motive. Why are we even using the technology? There's danger in using technology just for technology's sake. But Tim Page said, is technology enhancing our worship? Will it bring more glory to God? If so, then let's use it. But if it's just keeping up with the church down the road, then no, then we don't need to really use it. So we have to ask the question, what is our reasoning of using technology in our worship service? And I hope and I think for the most part it is going to be beneficial to our worship service, to provide and create an atmosphere that are going to draw people into focusing more on Christ. And so if our motives are correct, then yes, let's use technology, absolutely. And the second precaution that we need to take is the performance of our technology. And so when technology performs right, it's rarely noticed, but think about the moment when the battery dies in the microphone, or uh, there's a lot of feedback in the microphone and it creates a squealing noise, or the projector's bulb goes out. Well, now everybody is recognizing this, and in the moment of a worship setting, it can be a huge distraction. And so we want to be aware that our technology is performing right. And we also want to know at those times when, hey, we need to maybe service our technology, or we need to be aware that it's been a long time or it's getting old. We don't want things to happen that would distract from our worship. And so the church really should not rely too heavily on technology, that if the technology were to go bad or were to stop or malfunction, that our worship service would cease to exist. We want to be able to continue our worship service even if our technology malfunctions. And so a third precaution that we should take is the operations of our technology. We want to be sure that the person or the group of people that organize and lead and use our technology really know how to use it well. And so these people should spend proper time in preparation. They should spend proper time adequately getting to know the technology that they're using. And so they need to be trained to do so well. They need to know a lot about the technology they're using. And that way, even in those times where the performance lacks, it might also be beneficial for them to get it back going really quickly, instead of having to call somebody the next day or spend the money pulling somebody in to come fix it. And so not only should they be trained how to operate the technology, but they should know the best way to use the technology. Which brings us to our last precaution, and that is creativity and thoughtfulness when we're using our technology in worship. And so one thing we don't want to do is overuse our technology to where it becomes distracting, and people are putting a lot of focus on technology rather than worship. We want to use it discreetly, but we also want to use it to enhance our worship as well. And so I know in the past we have used our projectors to give biblical maps of maybe regions, and also a maps and structures of like the temple. That way we can point out certain things, and so we can use this technology well. We just have to be creative and thoughtful when we use it. Don't just use it for technology's sake, but think, how can I use it to better present to our congregation something that would enhance their worship? And so technology is a huge benefit that I think God has given us to use wisely in our churches. And we are, as leaders, should seek out all the things that we can use technology well and to bring glory to God. And so these are just a few benefits and a few precautions that I hope you consider, and I hope you ask yourself, really, why am I using it? Am I using it well? Am I using it too much? Am I relying on it too much in our worship service? And then, does this set up a atmosphere of worship that people are going to be attentive and engage in our worship services and really just seek after God? And so I hope this helps you. God bless.